let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to start with here at Reviewr is kind of what our onboarding and implementation process looks like. I know it's a weird way to start these conversations, but I think that the success of a lot of campaigns and programs really does start within the first 30 days. And so here at Reviewr, we have a lot of powerful features and tools and workflows. Not all of them you're going to be aware of, nor should you be. Not all of them are going to be relevant to you. However, there are going to be, 3 to 5 very specific things that the platform does that will provide you a tremendous amount of value. So we do like to work very closely with you guys on the very front end to kind of help figure out like, what is the unique about your program? What are your long-term goals? What are some of the challenges that you're looking to accomplish? If you want to share with us, how you've run these programs in the past, it's a really good chance for us during the onboarding process to, I hate to use the term audit, but kind of deep dive into like what you've done. And it helps us kind of figure out, okay, well, you said you do this, this, and that. Here's a very specific feature for that. Do you want to use it? Yes or no? Or, based off of our experience with others within the same industry or the same space, here's how they've done things. Do you want to incorporate any of those best practices? And it's a way for you to elevate the programs by maximizing the most that we have to offer, but also kind of our deep team's background of a decade plus doing these thousands of times. So I always want to start with that. What we're looking at here is kind of step number one. And so I use the term experience quite a bit. You're going to hear me say it throughout the entire conversation. At the end of the day, we're dealing with people and we want to treat them as such. I think a lot of organizations look at tools like a Reviewr as a way to internally, operationally, and streamline some of their processes, which is very valid. The more time we can help you get out of spreadsheets and more time focusing on your mission and your vision, that's a win. However, you actually make up, maybe 30% of the overarching program. Your members, your applicants, your review teams, your volunteers, your board members, they make the 75 plus percent of the program. And so how do we not only create systems and processes to make you efficient, but also elevate their experience? And so on the application side of things, it's how do we, get more participation and more impact? How do we deepen our member engagement scores? On the review team side of things, how do we lower volunteer fatigue, get them coming back each and every year? How do we ensure fair, non-biased judging and scoring processes, right? How do we incorporate these awards into a year-round, what I call flywheel, where it's not just like, hey, let's open applications for 2 months out of the year. It kind of goes quiet and dormant. We have this big gala and then people forget about it until next year. So for us, a lot of the success isn't just coming from the platform. It's also the processes that kind of go into place to make sure we run them the right way. So what we're looking at here is a simple example. The reason why I pulled this example is that there's a lot of different ways that you may structure your awards. And, looking at some of the names, there's a lot of different demographics of people on today's conversation. You might be doing individual awards. So what does that mean? Well, it could be a member award. It could be a volunteer of the year award. It could be a 40 under 40. It could be chapter awards. It could be leadership awards. It could be DEI awards. There are so many ways of doing it. And I do believe that for each individual award category, the system should be structured somewhat separately. I also want to kind of just pause there as we look at here some examples. Your award category design. I think a lot of associations really struggle with participation rates, and part of that could be from systems and processes. The other piece to that, though, is that we want to make sure that we have an award category in place for every member type, right? So it's kind of that thought process of not leaving any members behind. So no matter who you are, where you're at within your membership journey, there's a place for you. So I kind of just leave it at that. But the reason why I pulled this example is this specific client of ours is doing kind of two things here. One is that they leverage their main website from all marketing and communications perspectives. So you guys have strong content, strong brands. We should leverage that as much as we possibly can. And then from there, drive traffic from your page over to Reviewr. The other thing that they're doing is that they have multiple different award types. They do a 40 under 40, which has a very specific workflow, which I'm going to start with. And then they have all the other awards, which is very nomination driven. So with all that said, let's start with the 40 under 40. So what is unique about this? First and foremost, this is one of those unique programs where it's actually two parts. It's an open call for nominations, and then the nominees themselves actually get injected into the process to submit some of their own deliverables. This is a model where I believe if you can incorporate this, if it fits your membership and your type of awards, I would highly suggest it for a couple different reasons. Number one is a lot of associations ask the nominator to put forth a lot of time and energy just submitting. They have them fill out these long, lengthy forms. They're submitting a bunch of file uploads, a bunch of essay responses. And these are people taking time out of their day to nominate other people. So the extra added layers of complexity only lowers participation rates. The other piece of that is a lot of organizations think, hey, we want to surprise our nominees and make it very private, which is valid to an extent. However, if you're asking the nominator to submit things like a resume or all these very in-depth questions about the nominee, they likely don't have that anyways. And so they're already going to be going to the source to get that from them. So if that is the case, why don't we kind of do two things? Why don't we lower the barrier for participation and then get that data directly from the nominee? And the other piece to that, as you can see, this is a 40 under 40. This is a very specific demographic of individual. Some of the data that we have suggests that not even being awarded as a recipient, but just being nominated and visually nominated by a peer has a direct impact on their member engagement scores. It's also one of those things where we're always looking to have up-to-date records and data about our membership, right? Their address, their phone numbers, their emails, things of that. And so we use this as also a way to not just increase participation, but also enrich our databases with up-to-date records from our membership. So how does this work? In this particular example, they actually are asking the submitter to create an account, and I am going to come back to that about why this is important in just a minute. But at the end of the day, if you're using like an AMS, an association management software, which most of you likely are, there's a reason why we do single sign-on and have some high-level integrations with nearly all of them. They've come to us basically saying, hey, our membership uses us to run their awards. We're not meant to do that. Can we kind of tack on your tool set to power them? And certainly that's what Reviewr is intended for. And so if you want to have a single sign-on with your AMS to make it a more low barrier account creation process, logging in with their existing member credentials, you certainly could. It would replace this page. So why is a profile important? There are so many moving parts to these programs. Again, awards, grants, scholarships, you name it. You've got people, so you've got nominators, you've got nominees, you've got their information. So it's a combination of their submission forms, their file uploads, and then on top of that, you've got communication, you've got the judging and scoring process. And then for some of you, the journey doesn't end upon selection. So maybe if you're an award recipient, we want them to come back and submit like a bio or a headshot. For those of you who have like a foundation arm and you're doing things like scholarships and grants, maybe you want the recipients to come back and do impact reporting or fund disbursement forms. So there's 8 to 12 activities that typically go into these programs. We physically cannot have those 8 to 12 activities happening in kind of siloed and disconnected tools. So the premise behind a profile, which is very low barrier, you basically tell us who you are. And then long term, it actually holds on to every activity or every kind of like a touch point that you have with your membership from application through selection. So the in this case, nominator kind of comes in, they create their profile. And then I mentioned before, the structure of this one is that two-part workflow where we have a nomination. So basically, who are you nominating, and why? And then we have the nominee application, which I'm going to show you. Now, this is about as simple an example as there can be, and I think that is a good thing. Although, if you want to collect more data from your nominators, such as like your relationship with them, or tell us something nice about them, everything from here on out is completely configurable. So our entire submission process and our form builders are both quite robust, but also completely configurable. So you can have dropdowns and checkboxes and file uploads, whatever you can dream up. What I do like here, though, is we start with a simple question like, hey, what type of nomination is this? Are you nominating somebody else, or are you nominating yourself? And at the end of the day, we want to get to the nominees at the same place. I'm sure you've seen this in the past where if you've got a program where you have like nominator information and then the people who are doing self-applications, one of those two individuals typically has higher quality entries. And so it's very hard for us to compare apples to apples and not penalize, a nominee who was never even incorporated into the process, right? Who knows more about themselves than themselves? So to help you visualize this, at the end of the day, the nominator comes in, they basically tell us a bit more about who they are, and then it triggers a real-time email notification. Now, it doesn't have to be real time. We have many, many organizations that will take in these nominations. They search through them, they look at them, they kind of narrow it down first, and then they kind of release it to the nominees when they're ready. But what happens here is the nominee can get a real-time notification saying, hey, Kyle, you've been nominated for this year's 40 under 40. Now click here to fill out your profile. And it brings them to a completely new form. Again, in this particular example, we're asking for ethnicity information. We're asking, for like their degree types. And again, all the stuff that you see here is going to be hyper specific to your award categories in your programs. But these are all things that, generally speaking, the nominator should not be filling out because either A, they don't know, or B, it may be inaccurate. From there, we get into the deeper nuts and bolts of a nomination form, right? So your bios, tell us more about your community service, and these are going to be category specific, but basically this is your time to shine. Tell us why you're a deserving candidate for XYZ category. So we're putting the bulk of the effort on the nominee at this point to submit high quality work. And if this was one of those workflows where I came in and said, hey, I'm a self nominee, it would actually take me directly here to begin with. So at the end of the day, when the nomination packets come in, we're dealing with very consistent information amongst them. So I'm going to jump over here to another example here to show you the more traditional model, which would be, where there is no nominator involved, or I'm sorry, there is no nominee involved. This is just like an open call for nomination. So either the nominator or the nominee themselves is the one that starts and finished. One thing I do like that I don't have here to show you guys is built-in eligibility checking. So for many organizations, you have very clear criteria and eligibility per program or per category. And one thing we want to avoid doing is wasting an applicant's time, putting in the legwork applying just to find out that they're not eligible, or your internal staff's team time, vetting through a bunch of ineligible submissions. The other piece to that is there might be certain categories or programming available that the applicants don't even know that they exist, that they would be a good fit for. So what many of our clients are doing is they're loading into the system in like the first step, like a high level kind of quiz that asks the applicants a series of questions. And then based off of those results, we can say, hey, based on what you just submitted, either you're eligible to proceed or not. And if you are eligible, you could also then say, these are the 3 different scholarships, the 2 different award categories you're eligible for. Now, of those, whichever all of them do you want to apply for? So again, visually, I don't have that here, but that is a really powerful tool within the system. What we're also looking at here is your award selection, right? So if you've got like 6 or 7 different award categories, not only do we want to know what category is this for, but on the back end, we want to start to automate things for you. So if I say I want to be part of the, alumni professional of the year category, it's going to drop me into a bucket with all the other nominations. But then also maybe you want to have a completely different submission experience for those individuals. The forms are different, the data you're collecting is different, et cetera. So we're using some logic here that basically says, okay, I'm choosing this category. Here's what's going to be requested from me. And then it drops me into the actual nomination packet itself. So at the end of the day, there's 2 things that have to happen, and I'm going to move on to some of the more operational stuff. Number one is in these nomination packets, you need to collect essential information that your team has to have for a review and selection process, right? However, we need to do so in the absolute lowest barrier way as humanly possible. If the goal is to increase participation, but also increase the quality of nominations that we're getting, we cannot physically be having them filling out these generic web forms. They have to be able to save and log out. We can't say, go download this PDF and then send us an email with a bunch of attachments, right? So the idea is to kind of give them the modern experience. It's 2026 that they expect to have. One other kind of cool thing I do want to show you here that's built into the submission process, for those of you that also might be doing things like letters of recommendation. Within a review, we have a built-in trigger very similar to that nominator function, where the applicant can put in like the name and email of who is submitting that reference letter for them. And then it sends them a direct email saying, hey, Susie, you've been asked to submit a reference on behalf of Kyle, click here to do so. Why is that important? So number one is that more times than not, references do not want to give it to the submitters themselves. I've never seen a negative reference request, but at the same time, it is still a pretty private process. With that said, you don't want them sending it to you directly via email, because then you're left trying to figure out like, who is this? Who does it belong to? How do you reconnect it back together? Some of the other challenges that come into that is most humans, especially nominators or nominees, will procrastinate. So if your deadline to apply is maybe like on Monday, all of your submissions are going to come in over the weekend or Monday morning. And so if that's the case, 2 things have to happen. Number one is that from a pure submission perspective, we want to be sending them reminders and making it as easy for them to finish through. But also from a pure reference perspective, they were given like a 6-hour heads up that they have to go do a reference. And so in this model, you can actually have them trigger that notification early on, but then have 2 parallel deadlines, right? So you can say, hey, we're going to close nominations at this time. However, anybody that's been requested to submit a reference has another extra week to do so. And again, we want to make sure we send our reminders to them. So why does this work really well? It actually brings the references to a dedicated reference portal. So I mentioned beforehand, my goal is not just to showcase the system, but also some best practices. You can absolutely still do a very standard reference letter upload. We do tons of that. With that said, a lot of our clients have moved more towards like a template model, which basically says, hey, look, as a reference, it's a lot of work to start from scratch and write a blank letter recommendation. Also, it seems like it's a better reflection of your writing ability than who you're writing about. So how do we create consistency, but also lower the barrier? So a lot of our clients are having like, 3 questions that basically says, hey, as a reference, we want you to talk about these 3 things. So reference comes in, they see question, they answer question, boom, they're done. And then once they submit, all of the reference information gets sent back directly to the nomination packet automatically for you. So there is no recompiling. And I will show that to you. So with all that said, like I just to reiterate, on the submission side of things, we want to make sure that we're collecting the data that you need to go through decision making. We need to do so in the most low barrier way as humanly possible for everyone involved, nominator, nominee, references, or any other third parties incorporated within it. We want to make sure we do so in a safe, compliant manner. So online tools, the option to save, log out, mobile responsiveness, ADA compliance, all these different things. Running these programs is not just throwing up a web form on your website saying, hey, go apply. The entire journey, the entire life cycle has to be interconnected. By having a gap on the submission side then leads to operational inefficiencies, but also it leads to impacts on the review and selection side. So again, think of it like a chain link. If any of these chains break at any stage in the process, it has an impact on the rest of the link. So with all that said, as these submissions come in, you as an operator or an admin get these built-in command centers. And this is kind of like your one-stop shop to manage operations. So you can see in real-time dates and deadlines, you can see recent activity, and then you can also see like where are people within their journey. So again, going back to the very beginning, since we know humans will procrastinate, we know for a fact a large number of people are going to be in progress, right? They start the nominations, they leave, and they hopefully will come back, but not all of them. So you can see in real time, like, hey, how many nominators started but haven't finished? How many of those that were nominated were notified but haven't done their portion? And then using cadences, you can send built-in reminders to both parties. So you could say, hey, Susie, you started your application. Don't forget the deadline's in 3 days. Or you could say, hey, Paul, we saw that you nominated Susie, but he or she hasn't done their application yet. We're going to remind them, but also maybe you want to remind them as well. So just by being able to visualize how many people are in progress, plus adding on some of those reminders, plus breaking this into a 2-part nominator nominee process, on average has about a 35% increase in participation rates. They seem like small things, they certainly are, but by just incorporating them, it does move the needle. For those of you doing references, we do the same thing, right? So how many outstanding references have been requested? Are they done or not done? And if they're not done, let's send them reminders as well. So again, the goal here is to be able to visualize in real time, like what the heck is going on? Where are people within the journey? Where are they at in these different stages? And then start to kind of narrow in on your activities, right? So we have built-in email templates. You can send messaging at any time to individuals. You can do group emailing. You can add your staff. You can add your users. Basically throw a dart against the wall of anything that's award program operation related. It's going to be covered here in one centralized place. There's no more going to your AMS for one thing, going to a spreadsheet for another, going to Google Drive or SharePoint for something else. We keep you guys in a consolidated hub for virtually everything. Now, to visualize that, I want to spend some time looking at these profiles. I use that term quite a bit, and I think it's really important for us to look at it. These profiles really are what sets the stage for literally everything from the proper data collection, but also at the end of the day, how you pair up a nominee with a volunteer for review and scoring. So when you come into the system, you basically get this built-in menu of all of these submitters, right? And you can sort and filter by virtually any parameters. So if you got like 8 different award categories, you can filter down by those. You can look at nominators, you can look at nominees, you can look at both, you can look at submission statuses. But the general idea here is that when you click into somebody's name, again, I use the term person's name, not just a row within a spreadsheet. Like these are real people, these are your members. We want to treat them as such. So what we're looking at here is basically the virtual nomination packet. So in the center of my page is all of the data that we collected in the intake process, right? So this could be the nomination form, it could be the nominee application, it could be a combination of both. This is the submission in itself. From there, we also have some built-in communication tools. So like I mentioned, at any point in time, you can send direct messages, you can do emailing, you can do bulk messages if you'd like to. There's also a built-in note-taking functionality. So if you and your team ever want to leave comments and notes about a particular applicant or entrant, you can do so. You can share it with your team, you can virtually collaborate, but the submitter themselves would never actually be able to see that information. When it comes to the file uploads, again, there's generally speaking some type of supporting documents that come with these programs. It could be resumes, it could be, file uploads like photos, it could be videos. It doesn't really matter to us. Every single document that gets collected lives on their account. Better yet, when I press view, it actually embeds that file directly in front of me. So think forward thinking here. So if I'm part of your review committee, I got two little kids. If I'm asked to volunteer time to do judging and scoring, I'm likely doing this on Wednesday at 10:30 at night on my tablet on my couch. And so if you say, hey, Kyle, go look at these 30 nominations, and I have to go somewhere to download them, export them, go back to a spreadsheet, then come back into the tool, I'm going to get hung up along the way. So in Reviewr, once you enter the system, in theory, you never have to leave. Everything that anybody ever needs is in one centralized spot. So again, for the sake of your time here today, I'm not going to go too much deeper into that. I do want to highlight though those references. So in this particular example, Peyton has two references, one from Eli and one from Tom. When I click view, you're going to notice that those references also get embedded directly on his or her account. So what started with a nominator starting the process has now grown into a nomination form, an application form, all of our file uploads, all of our communication, all of our references, plus if there was already judging and scoring that had gone on, the results of it in one place. I do want to kind of throw out that there's a relatively new feature here at Reviewr that leverages AI. So for many of you, you get these long, lengthy nomination packets. It's a lot of word vomit, right? They're like a lot of essay prompts, a lot of file uploads. And your team is spending a lot of time analyzing the documents, analyzing the submission form, and then trying to score it. When in reality, depending on your volume, all you're trying to do is kind of weed out those that maybe don't meet the criteria and who you want to spend the bulk of your time on. So one of our newer features is AI summaries. And what it allows you to do is basically take a combination of their submission form. So it could be the nomination form and the application, or maybe it's like 4 different nominations on behalf of one person, plus their file uploads, and then convert the forms into a very consolidated summary or a brief of who the nominee is. It can be a more condensed version, or you can use it as a call out engine. So like what are very specific things that you might be looking for in a candidate that you don't want your team to miss? So not only does it help summarize it, but also helps pull information out that we just can't afford for our team to not look at. It's also interesting because if you have like a resume upload, you might have within your form like, hey, tell us more about your achievements, and they don't list something that's really impactful that does live in a resume. So again, it kind of helps them build like a more comprehensive nomination packet without putting additional work on the applicant. So I just want to kind of throw that out there as well for you guys. So where does kind of a reviewer then start to really excel for you? So in a very traditional program, again, awards, scholarships, grants, you name it, you might be taking in nominations through built-in web forms. Maybe you're doing it through email. At the end of the day, those nomination packets have to get sent off to a team for review and scoring. So that's where typically speaking, a lot of manual work comes into play. There's a lot of downloading, there's a lot of exporting, there's a lot of recompiling, there's a lot of spreadsheets involved. In Reviewr, you basically create these what I call review workflows. So these buckets do three very powerful things. Number one is it helps you create kind of categorization. So if you're a program that offers 6 different award categories, you might have a bucket here for each of the 6. When a nomination comes in, the system says, hey, this is for the Distinguished Volunteer of the Year Award, or this is for the 40 under 40. Therefore, we're going to drop them into that bucket. It's also used to control progression. So maybe it's a larger program. You have 150 submissions, and you have to do 2 to 3 phases of review. So the system not only categorizes them, but also allows you to advance them from one phase to the next. The third thing it does, which is the most impactful, is it pairs up the nominations or the submissions with your team for review and scoring. And so what we're looking at here is basically 4 separate award categories. And what you can see is off to the right, when Tom, Cooper, and Sally come in, they physically are only in charge of looking at the achievement category. When Tony, Talia, and Carrie come in, they're only judging the distinguished service category. So volunteer fatigue is a real thing. Understanding that, there are some limitations with staff size, but at the end of the day, we can't ask a volunteer to look at 100 submissions, right? It's just probably too many for them. So this is one of the many ways that you can kind of start to break apart these programs by not overwhelming the team by saying, hey, we do these 6 categories, you're in charge of this one only. And so this is a way for you guys to then also If it's multi-phase, you might have like an internal team in charge of vetting phase one, a selection committee in charge of phase two, and then maybe your board gets together for phase three and picks who the recipients are going to be, right? So that's how you kind of structure both the buckets, but also the pairing with your team. Now, where this gets, I think, a bit more exciting for many of you is if you open these buckets up, it shows you what's going on. So it's going to show you in real time a full-on list of every single submission or nomination that's been received. It's also going to show you who from your team in theory could review them. And so for some of you, you might have like a healthcare society where you want a very specific reviewer with a certain demographic or expertise to be reviewing a very specific candidate. You can manually pair them up. Maybe you are monitoring volunteer fatigue and you want to say, hey, I want every nominee to be reviewed 3 times, no more, no less. So what you could actually do is you can bulk select submissions here or your team, and then literally type into the system, hey, give every submission to 3 reviewers. And then the system will equally and randomly do those distributions for you. So there's many, many other assignment models built into Reviewr that we're not going to unpack today. There's some pretty cool ones where basically all nominations go to the entire team, but once it's been scored a certain number of times, it falls off that list and nobody else can review them. So again, to highlight, what we're basically doing here is kind of 3 really important things. We're categorizing the nominations, we're controlling the life cycle or the phases of them, and then within that, we're actually pairing up those nominations with our volunteer committee. Either they review everybody, or you can kind of take over with either manual control or automations to kind of narrow in specifically how you want the review to work. So the last piece of this puzzle, right? We've had a very low barrier, modern submission process. We've given you all the operational tools to create email templates, control the workflows, monitor progress, send reminders. We pair them up with our team. Now, what does a review and selection process look like within Reviewr? So when your team comes in to actually conduct reviews in Reviewr, they get a very simple menu, which is a list of the nominations that they've been assigned to. For those of you who do any type of data redaction, so hiding name, hiding demographic details, that's also built into the app. But the idea is that your volunteer committee can simply say, hey, here's who's assigned to me to review. I can then click on one of them, and then I'm virtually presented with a split screen. So no more having to go to Google Drive to download a packet and then go back to a spreadsheet to log my comments. I have them now side by side. So half of my page is the nomination packet, and that's a combination of the submission form, the nominations, the file uploads, any notes that you might be leaving for them. And then the right-hand side is your selection tool. So those selection tools are completely customizable. If you want to do thumbs up, thumbs down, if you want to do sad face, smiley face, if you want to have 64 questions that are weighted, it doesn't matter to us. You can do all of it. But again, the premise there is that your team has some type of data-driven rubrics to help kind of guide a fair, non-biased scoring process. They can do so in one sitting. Again, everything that they need is on the left-hand side. They just take action on the right. And then once they're done reviewing this particular candidate, they just simply submit and they move on to the next. And they rinse and repeat until their queue is empty and they reviewed all of the applicants. Now, from your perspective, what's going to happen is you get this built-in leaderboard. Now, across the system, there's a lot of built-in reporting. So if you want to analyze this data, generate reports, you can certainly do that. You can basically download anything and everything. But this leaderboard will actually allow you to filter by, award category, by stage, whatever your filters are. And then it shows you a hierarchy. So it shows you every single submission or nomination. It'll visually show you specifically who reviewed them and then the results of their individual reviews. So either individual scores, total scores, average scores, whatever it is that you want to do to get from data and submission to decision. So for some of our clients, they say, hey, these are the results because this is the highest rated nomination. That's great. Others might say, hey, we have to do a multi-phase process. So let's take like the top 15 and then at the bottom advance into round 2 or board selection. Others will actually pull this up as a team and they say, hey, these are the results. Let's now get together. Let's deliberate. Let's talk about it. And who knows, maybe there's a really compelling case why Sheldon should be selected over Peyton. We at Reviewr don't make any decisions for you. We just give you all the data that you need to make the most fair, non-biased, compliant selections as humanly possible. Couple other kind of pro tips there and best practices. As a committee member or as a volunteer, generally speaking, humans read a list top to bottom. And so if I and say, for example, Sally are both part of a committee, we're both given the same 30 people with the same scorecard. By the time we get to the 30th person, we're now scoring them on a different scale, right? Because we have 29 other people, we can compare he or she to. So one best practice is just shuffle that list. So again, my 30 and your 30 are still the same. However, the order that they show up for each one of us is going to look different. Again, even using scoring rubrics, we actually have the data that shows that it has a more consistent judging process, and it's a bit more fair to the nominees. Other things to look at here. So one of the powerful features I introduced was the random pairing model, where I could say, hey, I want every nominee to be reviewed 3 times. Or I would say, hey, I want my volunteers to never look at more than 30 people. Love it. I would highly recommend it. The downside of that is that means that not every applicant was reviewed by the same panel. So what happens here is, what if one of my volunteers on average just scores way higher or lower than somebody else? And you can kind of see it happening here under Sheldon, where Mark scored Sheldon a 12, but then Judge Judy scored a 31. So by the law of average, Sheldon is now being negatively impacted because of Mark's score, and that might be valid. However, what if Mark has never given higher than a 13? By his or her own standards, he or she actually scored Sheldon tremendous, but Sheldon is still being penalized for it. So we at Reviewr actually have some built-in tools to help you identify individual judging tendencies by your committees to help you identify what is going on, and then actually normalizes it for you. So what it would say is, hey, the score of a 12 by Mark and a score of a 31 by Judge Judy are not actually 20 points apart. They're actually the same score. It's their own personal average. What we really care about is, how does Mark score that applicant against his or her own personal averages? And then we give you a different type of score called Review IQ. So again, by no means is any of that required. My goal here is to try to showcase that there's a million and one ways to run these programs. We at Reviewr have tools in place for virtually every imaginable use case that you can think of. So with all that said, one last thing to take a quick look at here is our public review page. So by no means is this required. A lot of our clients though basically say, hey, look, we want to take all of our award recipients and we want to recognize them. However, we don't want to have just a stagnant page on our website that has like the year in their name and the award. So what this is doing is basically dynamically pulling from their profiles a more visual representation of it. And so we have 2 different use cases. One is a award showcase. You could say, hey, show me all the recipients from 2025 for this particular category. Pulls in a bio, pulls in a headshot. So it's a really more engaging way to celebrate them to your membership. The other way it's used is for member choice voting. I have mixed feelings on this. There's always a way to game the system. So by no means do I think that this should be like the primary voting mechanism. However, in a very traditional award, a large percentage of our membership is disengaged, right? Unless you're being nominated or unless you're part of the volunteer committee, you're not interacting with it whatsoever. You just hear about the recipients at the gala. So what you could consider doing is engaging 100% of your membership by allowing them to cast their own vote. I would not, again, make this the end all be all. I would either weight it, or I would have a separate award recipient. I would have like the volunteer of the year and then maybe the member's choice category winner for that one as well. So I want to make sure I'm staying on task here today, but I just want to show that out, that these are dynamic pages. It pulls in exactly who from your nominations you want to show up, and then also specifically what data you collected from them will also get output there as well. So with all that said, I do want to kind of make sure I leave ample time for any questions and answers that any of you guys might have. My goal here is basically to kind of showcase the power of the tool. Like I said, there's a million and one ways that you can run an award program. There is no right or wrong way. Each award, though, will have very unique nuances to it. At Reviewr, we look at these programs from a pure life cycle perspective. It's not just taking in submissions through a form. It's not just using like a committee in person to pick a recipient. There's 8 to 12 things that go into submission to decision. Is how do we leverage the right tool for the right task, working with your AMSs and other tools that you might have.